Morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Kanaj. I'm the editor of NJBIZ. Welcome to our discussion on cybersecurity. Now, if most of us, I think, immediately when we walked in here, we connected to the hotel's Wi-Fi, and that's fine. I'm sure it's okay. I mean, it's not like the network name was "Please hack me" or "Steal my data" or something like that. And it'd be great if we got those kinds of red flags, but unfortunately, cyber criminals don't usually announce their presence. So businesses and institutions need to be constantly on guard against breaches and intrusions and keep up with all the rules and regulations on data protection. Now, this morning, we're going to talk about how to do that. Leading our discussion is Michael Garrity. Mr. Garrity is New Jersey's Chief Information Security Officer and the first director of New Jersey's Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Cell. He manages the daily affairs of the office, which is the state's central hub for cyber operations and resources. Among other roles, Michael has served as Chief Information Security Officer for the Hudson's Bay Company and as Vice President of High Technology Investigations at Prudential Financial. He's lectured widely on the topics of cybersecurity and computer forensics and has provided technical assistance to law enforcement agencies here and abroad, including the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and Scotland Yard. Michael, we're glad you're here. And with that, I will leave it to you to get us going. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. Thanks, and I'm thrilled to be here. As was mentioned, my name is Mike Garrity. I'm the director of the NJCCIC, the New Jersey Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Cell. We're about 3.5 years old as state government agencies go, so it's relatively new. And if you don't know what it is, just a brief snippet on it. We were created by executive order back in 2015 to provide cybersecurity services not only to state government agencies, but also to small, medium businesses, critical infrastructure, academia, municipalities, and counties. So we're a resource for you. And as the cliche goes, we're from the government, we're here to help. So anything that we can do, before, during, and after this session, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're a service provider for you guys. So we've got a great panel today. We've got all sorts of experience and expertise up here. Our job is to impart that expertise upon you as far as the cybersecurity concerns are, to help you manage risk within your organizations, your businesses, and the like. So over the past few years, we've seen a ton of data breaches, a ton of cybersecurity incidents. We go back to 2013, the Target breach was the one that really brought it to the fore. And it was one of the first ones where the board of directors were sued. And then, the CEO and the CIO and others were fired as a result of that. So this came to the fore with most businesses. Shortly after Target was the Home Depot breach. Breaches kept happening. There was Anthem not too long after that. Then we had the big Sony issue where the North Koreans hacked into that and they destroyed all the content and stuff. OPM, the Office of Personnel Management down in Washington, D.C., all of their information. And then more recently, we've had WannaCry ransomware, the NotPetya attack, the NotPetya one being the most devastating cyber attack in history. And just two companies here in the United States, Merck and another company were hit for over $1.3 billion in losses, okay? Merck is a New Jersey-based company, so it's here, it's happening now. And then with WannaCry and other ransomware and things like that, then we had the Mirai botnet, and the Mirai botnet came out and it took down about 1/3 of the internet. So if you were doing business and your business was in the cloud, it may have impacted your customers being able to access your services. About 1/3 of the internet was taken down on that day. One of the key co-conspirators behind the Mirai botnet was a New Jersey resident, okay, a Rutgers University student. Right here in New Jersey, in our backyard, these people exist. In fact, if you go back all the way to 1988, the first internet worm was created by a New Jersey resident, okay? If you move forward to 1998, the first major virus that impacted businesses, the Melissa virus that attacked mail servers around the world, was a New Jersey resident. Okay, so we've got a long and storied history as far as attackers, but we also have a long and storied history as far as innovators and protectors and defenders. And that's who our audience or who our panel is today. So we're going to go over a whole bunch of different things, and hopefully you find this interesting, but not just interesting. Hopefully you can take some information back with you. So with that, I'm going to ask my panelists to introduce themselves briefly so you know who they are and what their area of expertise is.
Sure, I'd be happy to start. Good morning. My name is Bob Egan, and I am the chair of the Data Privacy and Cybersecurity Group, practice group at Archer & Greiner. Archer & Greiner is a full-service law firm. We have offices in North, South, and Central Jersey, New York, Philadelphia, and Wilmington. Our group is a multidisciplinary group that obviously dedicates itself to counseling clients on matters involving data privacy and cybersecurity.
My name is Carl from eMazzanti Technologies. I'm one of the founders of the organization. I'd like to start off by saying, you know, the people in this industry, there's lots of providers that are out there. There's a great quote that you don't know who's swimming naked until the tide goes out. Our firm started, and the two founders were in the World Trade Center towers when the first set of planes hit. We became security first as a mindset. So even though something might be easier or a customer might be asking for it, we're their check base of whether or not it's really the right thing to do. Around Hurricane Sandy, we had 400 customers go down. We got everyone up and running in 72 hours. So I'd like to say that our firm has been tried, true, measured in our response for customers. We've floated up, so we were the Microsoft SMB Partner of the Year and really have this core competency in small businesses. We floated up into the enterprise space because we're nimble and fast. We're based in Hoboken, New Jersey, so birthplace of Frank Sinatra, baseball, and eMazzanti Technologies. My son's middle name is Gates, so we're super Microsoft focused. For the people who are running Microsoft inside the environment, we'd love to talk to you. Thank you.
Carl Scalzo, Online Computers. We're a full-service managed IT services firm located in New Jersey. We have a couple other offices around the United States. Our primary business is to make sure your business and IT needs are being met and being protected. So if you need some assistance with keeping your network operational and running and protected, give us a buzz.
Good morning, John Wallach. I'm a director at Gibbons PC. We have offices in Newark, New York, Philadelphia, Trenton, and Wilmington, Delaware. Our data privacy and security team represents clients on a broad range of issues and a broad range of clients, from the startup guys who are trying to figure out what they can do and how they can collect personal information and use it and what they're doing with their email marketing campaigns, to the medical practice that suffered the Petya not Petya breach, had their medical records frozen and unavailable for over 6 weeks, and how they deal with that incident, to domestic and international companies that are seeking to determine how they can move forward with their compliance efforts, whether it be with state regulations or industry-specific federal regulations or some of the international regulations that many of us have heard about and talked about. I head up the team, and I'm joined today by two of my teammates, David Crapo and Randy Gray, who are certified by the International Association of Privacy Practitioners. We're here to talk about a lot of different issues, and hopefully you'll have a good learning experience today. Welcome.
So during my introduction, I mentioned a whole bunch of different attacks and incidents that happened over the years. But I didn't mention Equifax, which happened just about 1.5 years ago. I didn't mention Marriott, that was more recent, and stuff like that. Many of us have been victims of identity theft. Many of us have been victims of credit card fraud. That information is posted out on the internet, dark web, and all sorts of places like that. Interestingly, none of the information from the Equifax breach or the Marriott breach have been posted on the internet. So it's not just data breach and financial information that's being looked at or attacked. It's all sorts of other information being used for other reasons, as we'll talk about. But with all these breaches, nobody seems to have been spared. And as a result of all these different incidents, lawmakers around the world have enacted laws and regulations intended to make us more secure, to make our data more private, to force businesses into some of these different difficult decisions to manage risk within them. One of them is the European Data Privacy Regulation and GDPR, as you may have heard. But a lot of us are still not familiar with it. So we've got two lawyers on here and give them a chance to briefly explain what GDPR is and how it impacts you. One of the other laws that came out recently was the California Data Privacy Act that also impacts New Jersey businesses. So maybe you can give us a brief overview of those.
I'll take one. You take the other.
Okay.
I'll give you the choice.
All right. Well, since Mike started with the GDPR, we'll start there. General Data Protection Regulation was adopted May 25 of 2018 and is effective as of that date. It applies to all businesses that offer goods and services to individuals located in the European Economic Area. That's the European Union, 28 countries, plus Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway, for those of you keeping score. And the GDPR is about transparency. It's based upon the fundamental concept that your data is your data. You should be able to control it. You should be able to do what you want with it. And the companies that collect and process it have to tell you what they're doing with it, how they intend to use it, and then comply with various regulations with respect to the processing and the control of the data. It is a very comprehensive regulatory regime. It applies probably, depending on the scope of your business, to many of you in this room. It is just not limited to the businesses located in the European Economic Area. We've counseled many clients here in the US that obtain, collect, and process information from people while they are in the EU. So for example, if one of your relatives goes for a semester abroad in any one of the EU nations, they would be subject to the data protection regime of the GDPR while they are located in the EU. So any data that they provide, personal data, to any company would be subject to the GDPR regulations. It has extraterritorial application, as I just indicated, and it requires policies, procedures, and active management of your data privacy and data security structures within the company.
So I'm a business owner in New Jersey, and I provide services or products, and I have a website. And folks from the EU are availing themselves of my services. Do I have to comply with GDPR?
You would be subject to the regulatory regime of the GDPR, yes, and you'd have to make sure that you comply with the requirements with respect to the collection of the data, the processing of the data, how that data is stored, how you're using it, and then probably the most important aspect is the data subject access rights. So that, again, consistent with that transparency concept and that concept of your data is your data, companies who collect data are obligated to honor subject access requests with respect to the correction of data, the deletion of data, the access to data, the transportability of data, and the like. So there is a lot of focus on the individual protections, and companies not only in New Jersey but across the world, if they collect data on individuals located in the EU, in the EEA, are subject to the GDPR.
Okay, so let's say I don't want to comply, and I don't. What is the risk? What are the fines like?
I'd like to take that, if I could.
Yeah, sure.
So this is kind of the why does it matter question. You know, the why does it matter question, and I'd like to describe something in just in the state of New Jersey. And all of us have heard the war on drugs for municipalities. We all pay taxes. Well, the only portion of a municipality that can make money is the police department. They seize items, they do auctions, they sell, and they give tickets, because all of us have gotten a parking ticket or a speeding ticket. Police departments can make money from a municipality. So let's step in GDPR. GDPR, there are countries like Greece, and we spent years reading about Greece. There's Italy that's not financially doing well. So when they came out with this law, they gave it teeth. And the way they gave it teeth is they said, use your police departments in your portions of our European Union countries that are not doing well, and you can now go and take these other companies that are servicing your citizens but might not have a headquarters or a base here, and you can tax and go after them for an incredible amount of penalties. So it was the first time you could see Greece starting to make money. You could see Italy starting to make money because they were taking their police departments and they were allocating them to pursuing other companies to go get funds. So why do you care? So while many of us are based in New Jersey and we only service companies in New Jersey, I mean, you gave us every single one of your addresses from, Connecticut down to Delaware.
I left one out, but that's all right. It's a small office,
So you start to think, well, maybe you brought on a customer. That customer could have just come to the state of New Jersey, purchased some goods for you. They gave you their information, and then they went back to the EU. Well, your location is here, but you now have their data. We were sitting with Avis. Avis, when you rent a car, it's in one system. If you get into a car accident, it's in another system. If you're in a loyalty program, it's in another system. All of us use different email campaign engines. We give it to third parties like Campaign Monitor or Monkey. How do you remove the data? So you have the first time ever, you have a group with teeth that can go and produce penalties and then collect it with the power of the European Union behind them. And they can go after firms in New Jersey that won't hurt any of their citizens. In fact, their citizens benefit from it. We're protecting their data and the money that they collect from us from penalties.
So I think that, I think all those are risks, but I think that there are more granular issues in terms of whether or not a given company in a given circumstance, say sitting here in New Jersey, is actually at practical risk for a variety of reasons. One is there are jurisdictional issues. There's questions about whether somebody's going to come across the pond and attempt to collect it from you, whether they're going to be able to. There's issues on websites as to whether you're trying to direct traffic from the EU to you. So there's all these risks. Now, I'm not quite sure at the end of the day it's really going to matter much, because I think that there are things going on that are going to counsel most businesses to adopt policies and practices that are GDPR compliant, one of which, and I'll transition into this California statute, which is the GDPR of California to some extent. It's not quite as comprehensive, doesn't go into effect until 2020, but it applies to businesses who do business in California, and only for-profit businesses, and you have to meet certain income thresholds, gross revenues of 25 million or more, or there's other ways you can get ensnared in there. If you receive and share the personal information of, I think, over 50,000 California residents, you're hooked by that. The main thing about both the GDPR and this California statute as to why it's got so much publicity is its definition, their definitions of personal information that's protectable is much broader. The privacy culture is much different in Europe than in the United States, and I dare say probably in California than the rest of the United States for, among other things, as California has distinguished itself. And it gives the data subjects rights very similar to those John told you you have as a GDPR, under the GDPR. One thing that both do is they give a private right of action to people, data subjects, individuals whose data is exfiltrated, obtained, accessed, stolen, copied, because of the data owners, the person who is the controller or processor of the data, a failure to adopt reasonable security measures. And that is part of a trend that's happening in the United States anyway, but it's pretty firm in California. And the way I think we see it, and John, you probably have similar circumstances, impacting people in New Jersey as well, aside from, oh, am I technically going to get ensnared by either of these laws, is there are business-to-business agreements that are incorporating these sorts of standards. And you may have one that you sign, it's a form, and it may be a trap because you don't realize what you are saying you're going to comply with. You're going to be compliant with the GDPR, or at some point you're going to be compliant with the California Consumer Privacy Act. You may want that in your agreements with vendors as well. So these are things that you, I think, need to be careful about. You have to be careful about your privacy policies on your websites. They have to be clear. None of this legalese stuff that your lawyers used to write for you in the old days. Now you have to be very clear about the rights that are being given to the people whose data you're collecting.
Yeah, and just 2 points on that, and I just want to reiterate Bob's point about third-party contracting. That's one of the most significant issues that I'm sure many of you in this room face, and that is either contracting that you do with vendors or contracting that you do providing your services. And what are the requirements in those contracts? And as heightened awareness becomes more and more prevalent about privacy and security, those contracting provisions get tighter and tighter and tighter in terms of what are your privacy policies, what are you doing for security, where's the liability being pushed, what kind of insurance coverage do you have. So that third-party vendor, either on the service providing side or the service receiving side, is an important issue with respect to compliance, Mike, getting back to your original question. What's the danger of non-compliance? Third-party contracting is going to become very problematic for you. One additional issue with respect to non-compliance, what's the danger? If you suffer an incident that becomes a breach, if the regulators come and visit you, which they will, you will suffer severe consequences. What they are, I can't tell you. Fines, penalties, loss of control. These regulations have consequences with respect to a private right of action. I don't even want to talk about what that consequence is like between fees and penalties and the like. So non-compliance, certainly many clients don't want to spend the money. I get it. But know that there are consequences and risks with that approach as well.
I'll add one more thing to that. Lawyers can tell you what those risks are, and probably in conjunction with folks like our two Carls up here can tell you, generally give you a pretty good idea of what that's going to cost, just almost on intake at that point, just knowing a little bit about what your operation is and the scope of it. So I guess our message here, and we'd probably tell you that throughout, is we didn't all come here to tell you this stuff just to get into heaven. We actually have businesses that do this stuff for you. A lot of people are reticent to take that next step after you listen to people like us on panels like this. If you haven't, I would urge you to do it.
Okay, so there's GDPR, which is the European Union. There's the California Data Privacy Act. But I think it's safe to say that just about every state is looking at increasing regulations and laws around privacy and cybersecurity based on all the different breaches and privacy issues that have happened. So it's coming to a state near you if it's not here already. So all these laws that have been enacted and all these privacy things, have we seen them actually making our data more secure? Have they had that impact, or on the cynical view, or are they just revenue generators for these government organizations?
I think heightened awareness is always good. And so if the regulations are being talked about, if they're being implemented on a very kind of superficial level, heightened awareness is good, because the more people are aware of privacy and security, the more your data is going to be protected. And that's the goal. Now, some of these regulations are problematic. Private rights of actions, problematic from a business perspective, right? Some of the other requirements in terms of either technical or policy requirements, they're problematic. But there's no substitute for planning. There's no substitute for preparation, and heightened awareness encourages both of those things. So I think these regulations have had a good impact.
Okay. So we have said data breaches and some legal issues, but also business issues here. As a result of a lot of these issues, cyber liability insurance has grown in increasing amounts over the past few years. Lots of businesses are taking out policies, cyber liability insurance policies, and it's not just businesses, it's government organizations as well. If non-compliant with GDPR or the California Data Privacy Act, does cyber liability insurance cover me for those fines that may be enacted upon me? Okay, and then what else does cyber liability insurance cover?
I'd be happy to do the insurance one. I think for both Carl and myself, we provide services that hopefully have like an insurance component where you hopefully never need it, or the insurance that works. We get you up and running. Our cyber policies are very high. We have a lot of retailers, hospitals, municipalities, places that have a lot of data that's juicy and for sale. Because of that, through contracts, you guys have done great jobs negotiating down that we need to have these great policies to protect it. On the insurance side, you get a field of attorneys the moment you get a claim put against the organization. It might help you whittle down some of the penalties and the like, but it usually doesn't restore your business operations. It definitely does not restore your customer confidence. No customer has ever gone out there and said, "Oh, I lost all of my data, Home Depot. Thank you so much. I'm going to go buy another power tool from you because you had great insurance and lawyers behind you." The brand damage that you get, the insurance companies don't replace. Your customer confidence, they don't replace. And the news is only talking about you with something that's negative. There's not many ways to recover from that other than to sell the organization or merge with someone else. So I'd say on the insurance side, if you block and tackle and you do the right corrective measures beforehand, that's probably the best insurance you're ever going to get. If you get the added benefit of some increased productivity or revenue, it's even better.
So I think that is all so, but I think you're nuts if you don't go out there and go to a knowledgeable cyber insurance broker and see what it costs, because the costs are coming down. The claims experience is greater. It's underwritten more specifically, and there's a lot of coverages you can get. You get first-party coverage where they're paying the costs that you incur for the Carls of the world that have to come in and do an investigation of a data breach for the lawyers involved. A lot of them provide you advisory services as well. So part of your first-party coverage is you can talk to these folks and they can tell you a little bit about what you might want to do from a variety of perspectives in terms of technology, in terms of business practices and things like that to minimize the risk, because that's what they want. They don't want claims. But they'll pay for attorneys, they'll pay for digital forensics teams, notification costs. If you have to monitor credit, you get hacked and the personal information of some data subjects is exfiltrated, you're definitely going to have to pay for some credit monitoring. You may have to pay for identity theft insurance. You may need a call center, those kinds of things. They may pay for the costs of the Carls to recover your data, depending upon what your policy says. And it's a whole menu, and you have to be very careful about what you get and don't get. Maybe business interruption. They may pay for, again, depending on what your policy says, they may pay for the costs of PR and marketing people to restore your reputation so you don't have to sell your company, or worse, go out of business, which many people in the SMB space do after a data breach. Ransomware, everybody's heard of that. There's cyber extortion coverage. You can get it for ransomware. You can get it for denial of service if you have website sales, things like that. They may pay the ransom money. Now, you might probably don't go pay it yourself. You may have to talk to your carrier about that first. There's a lot of things you can get. There's also third-party coverage, as John made reference to. We don't really want to talk about what happens if you get sued, but if you do get sued, these people can pick it up. So I encourage people to go get cyber coverage. Your general liability policy may, just by happenstance, cover a little piece of it, but you really ought to go get your own cyber policy.
I'd like to add one item to Robert, and really this is like a gift, is when you get your insurance policy, they ask you a whole bunch of questions. If you use that Everyone's got direct reports in it. Take that list, give it to your team, and you make that their objectives for 2019. Because if you can eliminate or check all those boxes off, the chances you're ever going to need the insurance are non-existent. You know, that's how they're mitigating the risk, because they never want to pay on any of their policies whatsoever. You know, so if you take that, this is our action list. You could go to your insurance company and ask them, what's the list? How could we reduce our costs with you? And then take that and then hand it for 2019 objectives to your direct reports. That should increase your posture, your security posture overall.
When you're asked those questions, you better answer them truthfully, because that can lead
They won't pay you.
to, that's right, you can lead to a denial of coverage. Pay attention to deductibles, pay attention to retention and sublimits as well.
And that was the question I was going to, have you ever seen a claim denied because of fraudulent information on the application?
We see that in the retail space all the time. The retailer, there's someone who does the attestation. They know there's a cost for their credit card. Their credit card merchant fees go up if they're not PCI compliant. So someone says, oh, I'm going to answer yes on all these items because that's going to make a positive bottom line impact. And then all of a sudden they lose the data. Well, now they get Amex or Discover, one of them, stopping to allow the credit cards. If you go shopping at some place and they don't accept Amex or they don't accept Visa or they don't accept MasterCard, you have to kind of consider there's something wrong about that store. You know, there's something that's stopping them from doing that. And usually that's a breach. They're losing too many cards that the card company doesn't want to allow them to use the merchant services anymore. But we've absolutely seen that in the retail space.
Or they're just on cash and they're beating their taxes. I don't know.
Yeah.
Could be that.
Possibility.
It may have happened once.
Yeah.
So I'm going to segue into a different topic. And John mentioned third-party contracts and what I call supply chain security. And if we go back to the NotPetya attack that I mentioned before, that happened. There was a provider of software over in the Ukraine, accounting software. And just about every company in the Ukraine used this accounting software. And there was an update to the software. They downloaded it from that company's website and applied it. And as soon as they did that, the NotPetya spread across networks worldwide, impacting companies like Merck and others. And it had devastating effects. So more recently, there have been talks about Chinese telecom carriers, Huawei and others. There are Russian antivirus firms, Kaspersky. DHS, Department of Homeland Security, has put out different reports, and we're prohibited in the government from purchasing those types of things. But third-party security is a big issue. Recently, the NJCCIC, along with the FBI and the state police, were responding to a number of attacks for different organizations. And what we found out is that they had the same IT services provider. And so they were going through the provider, the trusted provider, to attack these different businesses and organizations. So, you know, we're talking about this. How do third party, or how do companies protect themselves against, you know, these supply chain risk, and what can they do? So we'll start with Carl over here.
Sure. So first, you really have to be proactive with your third-party vendors, right? Don't arbitrarily give access to your vendors, right? So many organizations we go into, we see the HVAC vendor has access to the network. Why? They want to monitor the heating and cooling. But there's no security. Someone in maintenance just said, yeah, give them access to this network, right? Or some card access system. So they're giving access to these third parties without putting them through the same due diligence that you put your own team through, because you think, well, they're in the business, we should trust them. And that's how a lot of these breaches actually happen, is through third parties. Recently, there was an IT managed service provider through poor practices and not following their own, prescription. 3,000 of their clients actually had their networks encrypted by CryptoLocker, right? So you're trusting in a third party. Make sure that third party has some great best practices, has insurance, is doing due diligence. Don't assume because they're in the industry, you're safe, or they're a household name, right? Don't trust everybody. Another great example was, recently it was just discovered that one of the Google devices has a microphone in it. Nobody knew. They didn't disclose it, right? But here's a big organization, Google, has a microphone in a device that millions of people actually have, right? We trust them, right? They wouldn't do it, right? They wouldn't sell my data. So again, being proactive, especially if you're using, let's say, someone to do your mailings, right? A lot of small businesses here, you're giving your data over to someone else to do your mailings. What are they doing with that data? Where is it residing? How will it be used, right? We did a conversion for a company, a data conversion, and we were handing over the data to a third party to implement into their new CRM system. And we asked them a ton of questions, and they beat us up because we were asking lots of questions, and this was $1 billion company. And at the end of the day, we discovered that the data we were handing over was going into someone's machine on their home computer, right? Not because the company told us, because we asked a lot of questions. And in the end, the person we were talking to goes, I'm putting it on my home PC, then I upload it to the server there. It's like, okay, is your home PC part of the company network? No, it's just easier for me. And then when we approached the company, and we said, Sean is actually downloading this data to his personal PC before he uploads it to you. They're like, huh? So be cautious. Ask lots of questions. The vendors that want to shy away from it and just want to go with a big company, don't worry about it. Those are the ones that you have to worry about, right? Remember, the people that are operating these systems and working behind the scenes, if they don't have the same structure, training, they're doing what they feel is right. And they may not know what they're doing is not. And it's your information, it's your systems. So you really have to protect yourself. Ask questions, be proactive.
So if you're a company and you take in payments through payment cards, credit cards, debit cards, and the like, you're required to be compliant with PCI DSS standards, payment card industry data security standards. And one of the regulations within there is that you're, as a regulated organization, have to maintain your software and hardware at vendor-supported levels. So in the case of the NotPetya attack, okay, they were taking vendor-supported, software and applying that. They were doing what they were supposed to do as according to best practices. But that doesn't mean that the vendor-supported software that you download is not going to have a detrimental impact on your operations or on security. So, Carl, you do a lot of retailers. Yep. How do companies protect themselves against this when they're applying these types of updates? What are some of the things that they can put in place to help mitigate those risks?
Well, everyone's got a larger account, and we have a Fortune 100. The Fortune 100 downloaded an update from a customer, and they put it into live production, taking down their full e-commerce system this past Sunday through Monday at, let's say, 10 o'clock in the morning. That's a huge hit for them. They couldn't process or do any transactions across their customers, but all the stuff was reporting handshakes, and it was giving shipping notifications to our customers with no collections of funds because the database patch they'd applied for Microsoft had a table error problem. They forced it through to try and get their attestations for PCI compliance without doing testing like they should have in the past. Our organization does something I think is very uncommon with others. We do regression testing on patching. We used to have 30 days to do that, where we'd run it across a whole bunch of systems, and we pay into other testers that are out there that are running live applications with various different permutations. We brought it down to 17 days. We had to do that in 2018. We're down to like 9 days for 2019 because the number of attacks and stuff that come up can get down to 0 day. Something that's never been thought of happens right away. Will next year be 3 days? There's not that much testing you can do to make sure something's going to not break a system. before applying it. So, it's not all of us can do this, but I highly recommend. There are services you can use that will regression test patches and control the deployments of them before you deploy it to your systems. That's a service.
But just on that point, though, and while I appreciate what you're saying in the risk and vulnerability, I think if you talk to a lot of experts in law enforcement and the like, they will tell you unequivocally that the vast majority of breaches are because of a failure to patch.
Yeah.
And so just because there's a risk which can be identified doesn't mean you shouldn't patch. The benefits of patching and bringing things up to code or vendor security status, I think, far outweigh the risks. Thoughtful use of technology. That's what I tell clients. Thoughtful use of technology. There is no bright line in this space. So
Great point, John. And so the Equifax breach was because a vulnerability in Apache Struts was not patched, even though patch existed for many months before then. But I guess the point that I'd like to make is that if you are going to patch, you probably should have a test environment that you test the patch out first before rolling into production, just as due diligence to make sure it doesn't have a detrimental effect on your production environment.
And to follow up on what both you gentlemen, all three of you said, all four of you, in the failure to patch data breaches, I've seen that happen because the MSP who was providing those sorts of technology services to the particular, generally a small business, really wasn't following what it needed to do in order to find out what security patches were available, and then take proactive measures to roll them out to their customers. So I think when you're hiring MSPs to do your tech work, you've got to be very careful about what their capabilities are in the cyber area.
Having managed global organizations and been a CIO and a CISO, the toughest thing you're going to do is patch, because applications that were written long ago may not work when you apply the patch. And so again, you've got to play risk and reward type of games here in order to make sure that you can go there. All right, so we're going to get off the supply chain security in a second, but so we talked about doing certain things, the patching and all this other stuff, but from a legal standpoint, tailored contracts would seem to be something that we would want to have in place with third parties. John or Bob, you want to talk about tailored contracts and what the contract could contain?
Well, as I mentioned before, third-party vendor contracting, very important. The issue to keep in mind here is that the legislative and regulatory trend is for all aspects of data protection to filter down through not only collectors, controllers, but processors as well. So just because you may push down requirements to your vendors who are processing data for you doesn't mean that you're absolved of your protection, security, and privacy obligations. So you want to focus those vendor contracts that you're using for vendors providing services to you, as well as the services that you may be providing. Focus on the security requirements and understand that, as I said, the legislative trend, the regulatory trend is everyone who touches the data is going to be responsible in some way for it, whether you're a processor or whether you're a controller or an owner. And they're standard kind of contract language that you can put in there in terms of compliance obligations, in terms of minimum standards, in terms of insurance coverage and the like.
You better generally be prepared to adhere to the same standards you require your vendor to adhere to. And the last thing John mentioned is important. Again, back to insurance. Make sure that you've negotiated adequate insurance coverage with your vendor, and that just becomes a question of your ability to negotiate in the economic positions, relative economic positions of the parties. But make the effort.
Okay. The evolution of technology. It used to be where we would have a castle, a perimeter network, and everything was stored inside the castle, and we would put guards at the door, and they would monitor all the traffic in, and crunchy on the outside, soft on the inside, as they say. But technology has evolved. Okay, we don't have a perimeter network anymore. We're using cloud services. Many people are mobile. We've got mobile devices. And so our data resides just about everywhere, not only within your company network, but outside the company network. This presents risk as well. So, question to the panel is, how do we mitigate those risks? What are some of the strategies and tactics that we can put in place in order to help us secure data and our systems?
So education is definitely key to securing data and mitigating those risks. Everybody glosses over the education part, right? Email has become a race to the click, right? We got something in email, we need to click on it, we need to open it, we don't need to think about it. Education, slow down, read, go to regular training, right? Don't assume your employees know what they're doing, right? They're accustomed to consumer services, right? They're using Gmail, they're clicking on stuff, it affects their home computer. When they click on something in your business, right, and it starts recording the keystrokes or being able to log into your systems, a lot of risk. But education, I think, is key. The other is being, again, very proactive. Engage an IT professional to protect your systems with layered approaches, right? Firewalls, security, antivirus, malware, patching, right? Do the due diligence. Make sure that your house is in order. Don't assume that everybody knows what they're doing. I can tell you in most of the businesses that we go into, they just allow email to flow into the business, right? Looks like an invoice, I should open it, right? Everybody's gotten that email, right? How many people have actually gotten the email recently that said, hey, we just recorded what you did. We saw you were looking at something bad. And if you give us $100 US, right? 1,000.
You must have been doing something.
But it's scary. It's really scary, right? And we're assuming, oh, it's not going to be my accountant. He's never going to do that. It's never going to be our CEO, right? It's never going to be the guy that tapes his password to the computer screen, right? Not going to happen. But again, education, being proactive, take it seriously. Make sure you have a plan in place, right? Those are the keys to keeping you safe. Just something to go back, back a little bit. With a lot of these breaches and things like this, you're only hearing about the ones because, the big ones, because someone's going to go public with it. Do you have any breaches there are every day and you don't even know about it? Do you think a company wants to tell you they just had a breach? At the moment.
To answer that question, we get 25 reports of data breaches per week for the state of New Jersey, on average.
25, right? Do you know how many there really are? Tons, right? If you're running a small business and someone just crypto locked your network or, hacked into your account, do you think you're actually going to go out and tell anybody, right? And that's what GDPR and the California Data Protection is doing, is they're making it so you have to, right? And some of them are really strict. Will they come to the rest of the United States? I think eventually with time, right? It's politics. But, be proactive. Educate your staff. Right?
So one of the things, how do we protect ourselves? And typically we log into these cloud services using a username and a password, things that we've done forever, okay? Just a show of hands, how many are using multi-factor authentication? Okay, this is a lot more than I expected. And so Carl mentioned those extortion emails. Those extortion emails are saying, I have your password. I can see what you're looking at on your webcam. I can see that you have these videos and stuff like that. But there's a treasure trove of about 4 billion passwords that are out there on the public internet, the dark web and other places like that. That bad actors, threat actors, are actually putting in those emails to make you believe that they are actually in your systems, okay? And when we do the analysis, we find that most people use the same password for multiple sites that they're on. So if you use a password for Walmart, you probably use the same one for Target. Similar in, for email services or social media and stuff like that. It's just human nature because we can't remember those types of things. So Carl, could you talk about the importance of multi-factor authentication and how you can prevent issues like this from actually cropping up?
It was great to see so many hands go up. I mean, really, congratulations for the room. Multi-factor is a requirement. It's not an option any longer. For the ones that didn't raise their hands, your bank, sends text messages. You should immediately do that. Facebook will prop on your screen. You should do that. Google does it by default. I mean, these are all really commonly available items. We get phone calls from prospects, and they know they need our services because they've called and they say, I just wired $250,000 to someone because the CFO told me to, and you can't fire them because they're a C-level person that went in. You've got top-level management that always asks for a bypass because they don't want to follow the policy, but they're so high up in the firm, they're so critical to the organization, you can't remove them. So the people in this room, you need to go back and say there's no exceptions. Because everyone looks at LinkedIn and they figure out, well, who's the top people? Those are all the ones that are going to have the exceptions. They're the ones that were randomly made the domain admin because, they no one ever wanted to take the phone call from the executive that couldn't use the conference room system, right, to go and do an important video call because the guy wasn't an admin on the system. So for everyone here who's using multi-factor, please, you have to share that experience with others. If you've started to set it up and you're only using it to authenticate against your desk, but you're not using it for the tools you use, you're not using it for your EMR, your ERP system, you're not using it for your bank account, that needs to spread. And the moment you do that, those messages where they ask for $1,000, just delete them. They're worthless because it doesn't matter if you have my password. I could write it on the wall behind me and it wouldn't make a difference.
And I have his password anyhow.
Yeah, probably. I believe that.
So Carl mentioned business email compromises, the wire transfers of money, which we continue to see organizations be hit by. John mentioned before patching of vulnerabilities as one of the primary attack vectors. But the primary attack vector is phishing emails. Emails because, as somebody said, it's the race to click on the email. Everybody knows you're going to click on an email and stuff like that. So question to the panel is, how do we educate our users, to be diligent when getting emails and opening emails, clicking on links or open an attachment, and what are some best practices that we can impart upon the audience for that?
Sure. I'll start off with, first, I'm a big fan of in-person training, right? You absorb way more in person. If you force somebody to just go to a website and watch a video, they'll start the video and then they'll finish the last episode of 24. And then check a box that they did it. So I think when at all possible, do in-person training, yes. The videos will complement. The other is do testing, right? Test your users. There are services out there. If you'd like, you can come up and talk to me and Carl afterwards, where we could actually send phishing emails into your organization, right? And see who clicks, right? You'd be shocked, right? We did it for an organization with 300 employees. 200 to 300 clicked, right? And once you get that statistic, you go back, you force education. I just spoke with somebody who's a C-level executive at a really large government organization, and they have a policy in place that if you click once, you're forced into training. If you click twice, you need to do X amount of training. If you click 3 times, they disable any links on your email for 6 months, right? And this is a company with tens of thousands of employees. 6 months, you get no links in your email. So they're really hitting it home with the policies. So anything you want to add?
Yeah, well, and that's actually kind of an interesting segue. I mean, our standard default posture for customers is we use services that will replace all inbound links with a safe sandbox. So rather than deliver the link in kind the way it was formatted to the user, we replace it with a cloud-based tool that will, when they click on the link, it goes to a safe location and it tells them whether or not it's valid. So just like I'm happy to write my password on the wall, I mean, you can send me any links you want. You know, it's going to be replaced, and it's unlikely that one of those would be carrying a malicious package. Probably the only ways to really do that is, you know, in phishing, if you're really going from one person to one person, which is a very high expense ratio, those are very difficult to block. And the tools that we use would probably not work either.
You're one of the ones that believe in the infallibility of those sandboxes.
It's not infallible. I will say one thing that we haven't talked about is really defense in depth. We've taken a lot of very point conversations today. We haven't talked about the fact that you have to layer. You know, so if you're using email, there should be a spam filter. If you're using a firewall, well, maybe you need multiple vendors that are sitting in a row. So using best of class. You know, defense in depth, DNS security. I mean, most people don't use that, but if you keep layering the different layers of security, it's unlikely that they'll all fail. That would be my recommendation.
Absolutely.
Do you mind if I just make one
Please.
comment on the compliance issue? And I think this is very important, and that's why I interrupted. Your employees are, people will tell you they're your greatest risk of a breach. But I will tell you your employees are your greatest asset as well. You need to create a culture of compliance and a culture of reporting in your organizations so that when somebody does click on that email, they're not afraid to say, oh my gosh, what did I just do? They're going to pick up the phone and call whoever and say, this is what happened, because it's that immediate intervention which is going to mitigate a large percentage of the risk. So you want to do the training, you want to create a culture of compliance and a culture of reporting. Probably one of the most significant things you can do to take advantage of your most valuable assets.
And that's a great point. Thanks for making that. One of the things, and we're going to go in a little bit of incident response plans and what do you need to do. But at the top of the list for incident response plans is making sure your employees know who to report a suspicious incident to. I got a suspicious email, or I didn't log into this system, but it said I did. And so that culture of reporting, that culture of security that John is talking about is really important. Who do you report it to, and then what does that person do with it? And how does it get escalated so it's treated in the right thing? So Robert Mueller, and you've heard his name in the news recently, but a little bit. Before he was the director of the FBI, and out at a security conference in 2012, he said there's two types of companies: those that have been hacked and those that don't know they've been hacked. Okay, and we're looking at Marriott, we're looking at all these other companies. Everybody's a target, and everybody is susceptible to a breach or a compromise. So having an incident response plan is key. It's not just that you've been breached, but how do you respond to the breach? So from the panel, what are some key components of an incident response plan? And I know Bob mentioned before cyber insurance and having a forensics team and having a communications team and having breach coaches and stuff like that. What else is part of that?
Well, I guess on top of that, Mike, you have to add HR personnel, public relations personnel in your you should have already chosen, in my view, outside technical experts who know your system and can respond very quickly, which doesn't always happen in the insurance situation because they wait for the most part until you had a breach and then they send the team in. Lawyers, obviously, and who in your management team is going to be responsible for dealing with this sort of stuff. It has to indicate, it has to include an inventory of your data. What is it? Where is it? So that everybody can quickly know those things, so you can jump on it right away. Or a reporting structure, who's reporting to who. Somebody has to head the organization and the response, and I would have that person selected as a lead right off the bat. Escalation guidelines, when do you need to bring what to whose attention. Contact information for everybody so that we're not flailing around looking for phone numbers and cell phone numbers and things of that nature. You have to establish a communication channel, I think, with the external, with the internal, particularly with folks like your organization, Mike, law enforcement, things of that nature. A process to preserve evidence. The last thing you want to do in these circumstances is destroy evidence, and a record-keeping procedure. Who, what, and when. Who is going to do what, and when are they going to do it? It's kind of a general outline of it.
I would say definitely make sure you formalize a plan. No matter how big or small your organization is, have a plan in place. If people are left to their own demise, things will just be all over the place, right? You have an IT guy, he's going to start reformatting servers, deleting stuff, and you may not even know what happened and how it happened and how you can prevent it from happening again 2 days later after they bring back the servers online, right? Communication plan is awesome, right? You definitely want to make sure, from the IT side, I want to make sure your business stays in business, right? I say this to my clients all the time is, I'm here to make sure you're safe and you're protected and you continue to be in business, otherwise I don't have a client. Communication plan is really key because especially in bigger companies, systems down, we just got hacked, it's on Facebook, and now your business is news and noteworthy to the thousands of people out on the internet. Now they know you're vulnerable. How many people are going to come and use your services, right? Having that in that communication plan. But again, having a plan in place. How do we communicate? Where do we go, right? What if it was our email system? That's our form of communication. Do we have the phone number of all the employees in place, right? When to engage law enforcement, when to engage our insurance company, right? Having that plan, being proactive.
And just one additional component that I would add is a provision at the end in the unfortunate event that you do suffer an incident or a breach, you need to reassess. These plans are important to develop, but they're important to treat them as living documents. They are not stagnant folders that go on the shelf that you pull off when the proverbial S hits the fan. They need to be updated. They need to be reviewed periodically, right? It's not once a week, but periodically, or when you bring in a new service or whatever. So they're a living document, number one. And number two, provide for reassessment. If you have an incident, what can we learn from it, right? The best learning experiences are mistakes that are made that prevent future mistakes. And that's what you want your incident response plan to do for you and your business and your employees. Prevent future mistakes.
We have a lot of manufacturers in the state of New Jersey that are customers of ours. In 2019, they had to get NIST compliant and followed ISO. So our organization did the same. And our organization got so excited when we started getting certifications and, everyone wants to rah-rah and have fun. Well, as a founder, one of those things that's the toughest is to say to them, well, just because we got this, it's not enough. The Titanic was compliant. Half the boats, that was the requirement at the time, there was boats for half of the passengers, and that was compliant. Well, we know half the people died, right? So just compliance is not enough. So as a founder of the organization, we drive for our own culture and then for our customers is that you have to continually use it. If you write an incident response plan, start using them for the simple stuff. If you start using for the simple stuff, and it drives, everyone's aware of how to handle an incident. You don't have to wait for the mega one to come up before you dust it off and use it. Start using it for the simple stuff, and all of a sudden, everyone knows how to respond to items that come up.
And the only other thing I'll add there is practicing. Like John said, putting it up on the shelf, making sure HR is part of the plan. but practice it, because at the time that you do practice it, you're going to find all your weaknesses. If you think about hostage extraction situations, the SWAT team doesn't just show up and everything works. They practice day in and day out on how to do those types of things. The New England Patriots practice day in and day out. They want to win, okay? SWAT team wants to win. If you want to win your incident response, you're going to have to practice it and the like. So we've covered a lot of topics. Obviously, we could go on for days, if not weeks here. Last thing I want to touch on is resources for you guys that you can use. It's been, in our executive order for the NJCCIC, we're the state's one-stop shop for cybersecurity information sharing, yada, yada, yada. That one-stop shop kind of means that, we're supposed to have all the answers and can do everything. And that's not true of any one organization. What we're trying to do is create a cybersecurity ecosystem. We're all in this together. The threat actors that are, threatening you are also threatening us. It's not, your business is going to compete against, other businesses based on threat actors. That flood is rising. We're all part of that threat. So resources that, you guys can suggest to the audience that they can avail themselves of, whether they're paid or even free. And there's a lot of them out there. Paul?
Sure. Department of Homeland Security makes available some free testing for your network, right? There's a big wait list for it, so a lot of people will get on that list to try and take advantage of some of those free services. There's lots of education put out by your group, which is very informative, and you have a mailing list of regular weekly updates. Your managed service provider, your IT provider, should be putting out regular bulletins that are of no charge to you. Others?
I'm going to take Quad 9. So I mentioned DNS security. It's one of those secret sauce components. It's so inexpensive that no one ever talks about it because there's no profit in selling it. But the Department of Defense came out with a service called Quad 9s. Everyone uses DNS, so it resolves an IP address to a name. So when you look up Google, people misspell Google all the time. Well, they're just typing. I mean, they don't mean to do it by any means, but there's a lot of threats that hit for misspellings of domain names. Quad 9 would block all those. So if you're sitting in your house, rather than using Verizon or Cablevision for your DNS, put in 4 9s in a row with a period in between each, and the United States government would generally protect you. They provide the service, and it's the second or third fastest DNS service in the United States and the planet. So it's super fast, free security, given to us by the government.
I think for folks that are in the small and medium business space, the FTC website has a lot of very helpful information and guidance on general practice for scaling solutions to budgets and things of that nature, as well as a lot of overall guidance and information about threats and processes from a whole series of different kind of perspectives. And I think, Mike, your organization's website is excellent as well for that sort of guidance.
And I would agree with Bob's point. I mean, the point well made with respect to the FTC website for many business organizations. And again, Mike, you can't undersell the value of NJCCIC because they are a great resource to businesses in New Jersey across a broad spectrum for a variety of reasons. So thank you.
And it's free.
And it's free.
Okay. Right? And it's free. Everything we do is free. That's the idea behind it. All right, so I've asked a lot of questions of the panelists, and I've hogged the microphone up here. What we want to do is open it up to the audience for any questions that you may have of us. Any hard ones, I'll direct toward the panelists. Any easy ones, I'll take.
Hi, I'm David Hutter, reporter, NJBIZ. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being here, too. My question, you can determine if it's hard or easy. So I've previously been a reporter at other organizations where I've covered crime, as in, oh, there's an armed robbery at the bank happening now. I hear about it. Anyone who has a scanner hears about it. So then I, as a reporter, I write something up quickly. My editor puts it on the web. I'm mentioning this because as soon as this happens, we know about it the very second. We get a description of the suspect. We put it out there. Every news organization does. So, but I've heard about all these data breaches. I think we all have. What I'm trying to make a parallel is when I hear the news that there's been this huge data breach at this, fill in the name of the blank of the company. Oh, the breach occurred X number of months ago or years ago. Why is there such a lag in the time period from when the data breach occurred to when we, as the general public, hears about it? Thank you.
That's probably more of a tech issue than a legal issue.
Well, I'll handle that since I've done a number of, this is an easy one, a number of data breaches. Most companies don't know they've been breached, which is the number one reason. So it's typically a third party, whether it be a bank or law enforcement, notifies them. And it may be because the information is now being sold on the dark web, and that's how they become aware of this. Just because we have all these controls in place, and you think of Target as one instance, they didn't detect the breach. It's kind of like going into the ICU in a hospital. All sorts of bells are going off. You become numb to them. You don't realize what's important, what's not important, which is one of the problems with cybersecurity is really what is important and what's not important, being able to recognize that. But typically you don't know that you've been breached until somebody tells you, or much later after the breach. And I will say one thing, the NJCCIC, if you report to us, we don't tell that you've been breached. That's not our job. It's totally confidential. We're here to help you, whether you want to report it or whether you have to report it to the public by law. That's something that's driven by the laws that are there.
And I'll add to that. There's a tendency in business to want to panic a little bit when you find out you've been breached, and then maybe to prefer to hide it rather than do something else, and maybe you don't tell anybody, and maybe you don't tell your lawyers until something really bad happens, and then it's sometimes too late for a variety of reasons, legal and technical. But there is that tendency, and if there's a message that I can convey to people out there today, it's if you think you've been breached, don't panic, don't hide. Call your IT guy or call your lawyer. Probably ought to call them both, and engage people who are knowledgeable in the area of cyber law, cyber security from a technical perspective. It's only going to get worse. Instead, that old Fram oil filter commercial, either pay me now or pay me later.
Excuse me. Wahid Haidari, Director of Center for Cybersecurity at Rowan University. It's not a question, it's just a technical comment. Don't trust two-way authentication or two-factor at all. For example, we have just tested in our lab. I can send you a fake link to Wells Fargo Bank. You will come to my website, you will type your username and password. I will send it to Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo will text you, and I and my website will ask for type that code. So it's not going to solve any problem. Just training, and education. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to refute that. All right. Cybersecurity is about risk management, okay, and managing the risk. So just because something has been exploited, just because somebody got hit by a car crossing the street doesn't mean we're not going to cross the street if we take prudent steps to make sure we look both ways, walk when the little white guy, on the sign is telling us to walk. Yes, multi-factor authentication can be exploited in some circumstances, but it really depends on who you are, what your target is, what the value of the information is. But for the most of us, the risk is going to be mitigated by having MFA in place.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Everybody in the room is using multi-factor authentication today. You've been using it for years. And for most of you, the multi-factor authentication is 4 numbers, right? Who's got a bank ATM card? Right? Everybody, right? When was the last time you changed your PIN? Never, right? But that's multi-factor authentication. It's your card and the PIN. If it was just the PIN, let's log on to Citibank and let's start taking out funds. But I need multiple forms of authentication. So it's due diligence, it's mitigating that risk. And one other thing for the free resources, for a good amount of people, most businesses are using today either Google, Gmail, or Office 365. They do all offer multiple forms of multi-factor authentication free with their services. So that's something to take into consideration if you're not already doing that today.
Don't let perfection be the enemy of excellence, as they say. Ma'am?
Good morning. Elizabeth Hans from United Wave, Central Jersey. I guess my question is probably Carl Scalzo is going to, but it's been touched on here in terms of scalability. I mean, all these things are wonderful in terms of all the technology protections and whatnot, cybersecurity, insurance, all these things. But how do you scale it down to the really small business, okay, to the nonprofit for whom, okay, understand the need for data security, but frankly, cost, okay, and expense is very much a critical concern in terms of being able to do what we should be doing and do it at some reasonable cost.
Sure. So there are great resources for nonprofits out there. Microsoft is tremendous in this field. If you're not familiar with a site called TechSoup for nonprofits, they do offer a lot of the premium services for nonprofits. So enterprise security management and things like that are free for most nonprofits, or at least the first 50 or 150 licenses are free. So there's some great resources out there. Unfortunately, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit, you still have to take the same steps to protect your business. And there are lots of practical steps that you can do every day, starting with that being proactive and education and things of that. But also doing some I have an amazing nonprofit that I work with, and once a month at a management team meeting, they do a tabletop discussion related to a security incident. What happened if we lost email today? What happens if we lost our phone system? What if our website was breached? And they do it at every management meeting once a month, and it keeps people thinking, right? Because if it's in their head, they'll be proactive. If they think that the guy's got it under control, you're in a lot of trouble, right? Because the IT guy or the IT service can only do so much. So lots of practical steps, and feel free to reach out to us. We do service a tremendous amount of nonprofits.
And on the cyber insurance, there's a lot of markets out there. There's a lot of competition in the markets, and you can tailor policies, as I think it was Bob said earlier, to specific components of risk, right? So that the insurance industry is very smart, right? They took a package policy and broke it down into pieces. Why? Because you can make more money selling the pieces. The aggregate of the pieces is greater than the whole. But it works well for businesses, though, because you can pick and choose the type of coverages. You got to go to the right markets, go to an experienced broker. It's really not that expensive to get $1 million or $2 million worth of limits. And I would suggest to you, particularly in the nonprofit space, given the fact of where your revenue stream comes from and the information that you're dealing with, both on the customer side as well as on the participant side, cyber insurance is, I would think, an integral part of your risk mitigation and cybersecurity plan. And you can find a policy that meets your needs that's not going to be too expensive. I'm certain of that.
And to your scalability point, everybody's got to be practically defensive these days, particularly in the smaller businesses, because the cost of a breach and the cost of liability can put you out of business, and often do. I've seen a lot of stats that are pretty eye-opening. So the movement in the law towards requiring people who hold this information to use reasonable measures to protect against it, there's, unlike many circumstances in the law, there's at least some suggestion that affordability is going to be a factor to defend, so long as you're making deliberate decisions on that basis, and you probably want to document them. And those are close issues. Different lawyers might differ on that. But if you have to do something, and in fact, Pennsylvania just had this new case that said that you have to use reasonable measures to protect employee data. And it's going to expand to all sorts of data, in my view. The fact is that there's so many low-cost things you can do that doing nothing is going to equal liability, no doubt. So you really need to deliberately address these issues, and including scalability. Don't just sweep it under the rug.
Can I just add one thing, and then just something so we're all on the same page? Email by default is not secure, and I bring that up not to pick on nonprofits, but nonprofits generally have a tendency to email out a lot of information between volunteers and the like. So let's make sure we all keep in mind that email by default is generally not secure. When you're sending that email to somebody on the internet, it is very probable that someone can intercept that message and fully read it. So keep that in mind.
How you doing? Roderick Minson. Regards to cybersecurity, it appears to be more of a global issue as well. Isn't it about time that some type of treaty be enacted to be able to protect, a lot of corporate America globally that's being affected by this problem?
Well,
It's a good jurisdiction question. I can start off with
go
that,
ahead.
and then I'll go to the attorneys. It's a good jurisdiction question. So where the funds for it is one. I talked about Italian Police Department and Greece. Having money that came in by enforcing privacy protection and then applying penalties to it. The UN is probably the best fitted to do something like this, because everyone's paying into it currently, and there's a global benefit for the member organizations. I think it'll take some time, but we're probably going that direction. And the UN or some council like that would be the appropriate place.
If you can get consensus. People in the United States hate the GDPR, and the privacy cultures are just very, very different. We may come to adopt those practices, but it's going to take a bit.
Yeah, and I think that's the relevant point, is that the perspective on privacy is just very different from Europe to here. In the U.S., it's been for many, many years, and in many respects, it remains kind of fair game, right? It's almost like the Wild West. What can I do with your data is really what it comes down to. That's starting to change, but and in the EU and the EEA, they have a very, very different perspective. So a treaty is certainly something that may evolve. It's going to take I think a shift in business practices and perception. The European Union has designated certain countries globally as having adequate security practices which allow for the transfer of data from the European Union to that country. Okay? The U.S. is not one of those countries. So in the view of the European Union, the U.S. does not have adequate data security practices or requirements to ensure that data transferred from the European Union to the U.S. will be adequately protected. That is a mile away from a treaty.
Good morning. My name is Keisha Feaster, and I would like to say thank you just for coming out and extending the information and stuff towards us. But my question is the data. This young man already had, I just wanted to piggyback a little bit off what he said in reference to the data security, the prevention of it. Once we find out what was the reason and the cause of the information being leaked out, is there any way that we can possibly use, help the other companies to protect themselves with the information, even though with some companies and stuff, the data being leaked out, it may not be the same exact way, but is there any way that we can possibly, once we find out from one company, just to help the other companies to protect themselves?
Absolutely. So this is part of why the NJCCIC was created, so that information sharing. So if you're a victim company and you do report to us, obviously we're not going to say company X was breached or compromised and stuff like that. But we will take the techniques and tactics that were used and share that information, because those same tactics are going to be used against other NJCCIC members. And if you get our bulletin every Thursday, you're going to see stories, and that's really what we're putting in there. We've had companies in New Jersey, we mentioned Multifactor before. They didn't use Multifactor on their Office 365 accounts. People logged in because of those passwords that were out there. They sat there, they put a forwarding rule in, so they sent out all the mail from inside the company to a Gmail account they set up, and then looked for HR type things, direct deposits and wire transfer forms. Then they submitted those internally. So all these schemes that we put out there are not because we know a lot more. It's the threats that we're seeing against the state of New Jersey, but also what's being reported to us by others. So yes, it's sharing information. That information is really important so everybody else can protect against those same threats. Up in the jury box.
Frank O'Malley, Franco Mutual Insurance. One of the biggest challenges today from an IT viewpoint is you have an application development team that wants to open it up for customer experience. You have a data, security team that wants to lock it down. Now, today, in order to get in front of people, to get customers, you need customer experience. We're in the world of IoT. That's a whole nother discussion. Leaving default passwords, the same, and then you get into a hacker gets into a thermostat and a fish tank to get into your environment, or the security camera. How do you handle this challenge? I know it's probably a much bigger discussion, but where's the trade-off? When you talk about the 7 layers of security, but when you add 7 layers of security, that can slow down the customer experience, and therefore they don't even get to your storefront. Be curious to see the viewpoint. Thank you.
I'm going to go back to that 4-letter word, risk, okay? What are the risks, okay? And then how strongly are you going to apply risk management principles and stuff like that? If you think of why IT exists to make the business more efficient and effective in providing business services. If you think of why cybersecurity exists, it's to manage risk in those information technology services and stuff. So both of those are actually supporting the business, and the business has to determine what its risk appetite is. It can't be the Department of No, which a lot of security organizations are known as, to make those decisions based on the business. Cybersecurity supports the business just as IT supports the business. So if you don't have that balance within the organization, that's something that you need to strive more toward, rather than having these silos of gatekeepers and stuff. I'm following the microphone, sorry.
I got hung up in the back. So in the environmental area, states can follow California for car emissions. It's pretty clear to me that the U.S., because of our capitalist society and all that, people are making money off of not doing what the EU did. So California took the next step. Obviously, nonprofits are involved. Is New Jersey? This is for you, Mike. Is New Jersey heading in this direction, or are we ignoring it?
Are we
legislatively?
Yeah, so there's legislation that has been proposed at the state level, but also at the federal level regarding privacy and cybersecurity. I think all states are looking at that, where they can best protect the citizens. At least that's the intent. But yeah, we see more and more legislation coming out. We're tracking legislation. There is GDPR type legislation that has been introduced. And some other things regarding privacy, data brokers, and the rest. So I think you're going to continue to see that trend. And you guys, from the legal perspective, I don't know if you're tracking the legislation that's going on as well.
Yeah, we get bombarded probably daily with some report of something going on in Montana, things like that. And oddly enough, it is important, even though we're fairly regional, because the law of where the data subject is generally governs a lot of your notice responsibilities and things of that nature. And there's been a trend, I think, in the last year or so, maybe about 15 or so states have passed statutes or had cases decided which impose this duty to use reasonable care to protect against the unauthorized access or exfiltration of this type of information. So there are a lot of trends in that way. And in fact, the Congress just held some hearings on a federal privacy statute, and there are some, I think, 3 bills that are pending that have all sorts of different kind of provisions, many GDPR or California-like.
In the New Jersey legislature, maybe about 2 months ago, and it's increased since then. There were 50 bills in the New Jersey legislature that dealt with some type of privacy or security. There are currently 2 bills that have a fair amount of traction. The Commerce Committee, I believe, is having a hearing in a couple of weeks on one of the bills, which has bipartisan support. The chairman of the Homeland Security, Chairwoman Valerie Veneri-Huddle, and Tom Keene in the Senate. And then Troy Singleton has a bill that's out there. So there are steps in that direction in New Jersey. I think states are going in that direction. To Bob's point, obviously we're concerned about New Jersey, but we're concerned about other jurisdictions because the residents of the data subject typically would apply. So that's the legislative trend. Whether they're going to look like the California bill, I suspect not, because the CCPA has huge problems with it. I mean, there are very, very few people other than the legislators that proposed the bill that like the way that thing reads. Huge industry opposition and the like, particularly in California. So that's the trend. New Jersey is right there. There are federal bills that are pending. Senator Rubio proposed using the Privacy Act of 1974, which doesn't sound like something 40 years old should apply, but if you read the bill, it actually could work, which is interesting. We'll deal with issues of preemption and the like, but this is an issue that's here to stay. It's going to continue to evolve, and regulatory and legislative compliance is something that, fortunately or unfortunately, needs to be on the forefront of everybody's mind.
One of the big fights is over the extent to which companies are going to be able to use your cookies and things of that nature to track your online presence and then direct ads to you and things of that nature. Obviously, privacy advocates think that people ought to either that ought to be banned, or you need to opt in for stuff like that. Where industry is that sells stuff that way is certainly not too keen on those ideas. Well, California basically is allowing people to opt out of those sorts of tracking things.
Yeah, my best perspective on that is it's being negotiated.
One more question, and then we're going to wrap up here.
Hi. I own a registered investment advisory firm, and this past year I went down the cyber insurance rabbit hole because I felt this was something I probably needed. So the first policy I looked at that someone was trying to sell me didn't actually cover phishing when I read the policy. Then I did end up buying one, but recently I've read that some of the insurers are trying to get out of paying when the breach is caused by a state actor and they're claiming it's, an act of war or terrorism. So what good are these policies if they're going to basically try to get out of paying if China was the author of the malware that caused the problem?
Yikes. Well, I'll respond in this way. What good are the policies? They cover a lot more than phishing. So they cover reputational damage. They cover a whole variety of things, potentially fines and penalties, PCI compliance. They cover breach, notification, lawsuits. So the policies, depending on what you buy, can be very effective in terms of risk mitigation tools. It shouldn't be your only risk mitigation tool, but it can be very effective. With respect to the act of war exclusion that you're talking about, in fact, it's ironic. I was just talking with an underwriter from Star Insurance Companies last Friday, and we were talking about this specific issue. And needless to say, there's a lot of discussion about it. There's a lot of ambiguity in what is an act of war. And so my advice is buy an appropriate policy, and to your point, read it. This is not a type of policy that you buy like a liability policy off the shelf and you're covered. You need to tailor the policy to your business, and kudos to you for doing that. But buy the policy, make the claim if you need to, and hire an experienced professional to assist you in that process, whether that's a broker, whether that's a claims advocate, whether that's a lawyer, whatever it is. The insurance is valuable. I can tell you from client experience that the insurance is valuable. The active war exclusion is a hotly debated issue in the insurance industry right now. I certainly appreciate your concerns about it, but I would encourage you not to let that dissuade you from appropriate risk mitigation. And if you're subject to the New York DFS regulations, God bless you.
Yeah. All right, with that, I'm going to open it up to the panelists to make final statements and anything else that you want to impart.
Sure. I mean, I guess I'm going to reiterate what I said a couple of times because I think it's really important. Don't ignore this. I mean, you're here for a reason. I gather you had a curiosity, not because you like the pineapple that they were going to serve. But don't ignore these threats and don't ignore these risks. Be proactive. I mean, I can tell you, a story of a client who got hit with ransomware, didn't tell anybody, paid the ransom, got hit a second time, didn't tell anybody, paid the ransom, didn't do anything more. Unfortunately, it was a tax preparation business, and whoever was in there putting ransomware in there did not get out, and you can imagine what happened from there. So that's just one, and I'm sure everybody's got equal number of types of stories of those sorts of disasters that occur. The liability trends are going in the way we've mentioned. You're going to be liable to others if you don't take reasonable measures. Doing nothing equals liability, and there's a lot of stuff you can do that's relatively inexpensive. Don't collect information you don't need. Shred the stuff that you no longer need. Have a responsible document retention policy. Electronically shred stuff as well, because there's a requirement in New Jersey. You can't just put your computer out back and you're done with it. Just limit user access to all sorts of things that make sense. And Mike's right, it's part of a risk management program. Just don't stop here. And thanks for listening.
Carl, eMazzanti Technologies again. He mentioned some items earlier on in the presentation about discovery. We have an e-discovery practice where we'll go across our customer's environment. We'll do pen tests. We'll do analysis of what data they have. What are the silos of information they have? Knowing what you have at least gives you some sort of idea of where you can start to focus some attention. If you don't know what you have, it's very difficult to think of some proactive stance. Today I've tried to give some good advice with, if you're going to buy insurance and they give you a list, make that the goal for your direct reports. This is your action item list. We gave away this idea that you could use free DNS security that's out there. There are real simple action items you could leave with today. Assessments are a great one. Super inexpensive, delivers great value of information, and then your organization can decide what it wants to do. Is that acceptable risk or not? And we're going to focus some attention for the year. Thanks.
Carl Scalzo. Again, I would say one of the key things is don't travel alone. Don't try to do this on your own. Don't try to get all the alerts. Don't try to be the expert. Pull in experts, pull in partners to help you with this, process that will continue for many years to come. This is not a one and done. You're not going to attend this seminar, install some virus protection, and put a patch on your computer and be good to go. This is something you're going to have to pay attention to moving forward. There is no end time. There isn't a date. So find good partners. Don't travel alone.
I'll repeat something I said earlier, and I think it applies not only in each of our businesses, but also in our personal lives as well. Thoughtful use of technology. Thoughtful use of technology. My friend over here referenced an internet-controlled thermostat. Really? That was the breach of security in a casino in Las Vegas. Do you need an internet-controlled thermostat? I guess you do, but okay. Carl talked about the Google machine that has a microphone that was never disclosed. Thoughtful use of technology.
I'm thrilled. We made it through a cybersecurity presentation panel discussion in 2019 and didn't mention blockchain.
So am I.
And the reason I say that, because I see a lot of organizations, asking and looking at blockchain while they have the passwords written on Post-it notes. All right. One is not going to get rid of the risk in any other. Okay. We're all here and still have a few minutes afterwards if you guys have any questions. The NJCCIC is around. Building a cybersecurity program is not something that everybody gets to do. I've gotten to do it in a number of different organizations. Last year, we wrote and published a statewide information security manual. So if anybody is struggling with best practices, policies, standards, guidance, you can go to the website and you can pull that down. You can plagiarize it to your heart's content. It's public information.
It's the most sincere form of flattery.
Yes, plagiarism. Yeah. The other thing that we did, and assessments, as Carl mentioned this, there was a bill that was enacted a couple of years ago called the Water Quality Accountability Act, requiring water purveyors, water companies in the state of New Jersey, with internet-connected control systems to submit their cybersecurity plans to the NJCCIC. So we started getting things on the back of a napkin. We got engineering studies. We got things all over the board. So what we did is we put together a self-assessment tool. There's 289 questions that allow you to go through all sorts of different control areas and control objectives and rate yourself, whether it's not implemented, minimally implemented, partially, or moderately, and all the way up to fully. Okay. There's no organization that gets fully on all sides. And it's not meant to identify bad parts. You're not doing this. It's for you to become aware of risks that you're not even thinking about. We didn't talk about IoT security, but you have embedded systems all over the place. Every store, department store in every mall has an internet-connected thermostat. That's how they do that, okay? So if you want a copy of the assessment, you could either submit it to us or just keep it for yourself for knowledge. Just send us an email, we'll get it to you and stuff like that. So lots of resources that are available for you. We're all in this together. Thank you for coming out this morning. And I'm gonna turn it over to Ken, and he can close the session.
Certainly. Thanks, Mike, and thank you to the panel, Robert Egan, Carl Mazzanti, Carl Scalzo, John Wallach. I don't know about you folks, but I've spent the last 45 minutes furiously changing all my passwords. I mean, I guess using the word password for everything was probably not a good idea. We'll have full coverage of today's program later today on njbiz.com, and then in our next print edition. We'll also have a video of the entire program later. While I'm on the subject, thank you to Kane AV for help with audio and video services today. If you want to know more about Kane, you can pick up a business card at the registration desk. You'll see on your tables there are flyers for our General Counsel of the Year Awards and Digitech Innovators. Please get your nominations for those things in. The deadline is March 1st, which is Friday. I hope you can all join us for our next discussion, which is on substance abuse in the workplace. That's on March 26th, right here at the DoubleTree. I hope to see you there. Thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you again soon.